Rabbi Bruce is a member of the local community, very involved in the local community, and my close friend. I think he's going to say a couple of words about the Rabbi Sachs Legacy Trust, and then introduce our speaker for today. So, Rabbi Bruce, you have the floor.
Welcome. Thank you so much for inviting us. Thank you so much for being here. I know you have busy schedules. You mentioned that I'm involved with the Rabbi Sachs Legacy. Has anyone heard of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs?
But don't ask follow-up.
A few people.
I've heard of.
Okay. So, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, of blessed memory, passed away in November 2020. Before that, he was chief rabbi of the UK, and then after that, really had a career as an international public intellectual. He wrote over 40 books on Jewish subjects and general society. To know how impactful he is, you won't really go to many Jewish events that don't quote him. More than that, President Biden, over the past year, quoted him 3 times. So he's very quotable, very approachable. Rabbi Sachs's philosophy really was, like your centre here, an encounter between different faiths, different cultures. And he really believed that was mutually beneficial and would bring great benefit to different cultures to speak to one another. Conversation was an important part of his philosophy. So at some point in the future, I would really recommend looking up Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. We have our whole website where you can find a great article on him, Wikipedia, to see the sorts of things that he impacted and influenced. Just to tell you one more thing, when he passed away, the current King of England gave a eulogy. He was very close with King Charles, and really was able to transcend all religious boundaries in his teaching. So he's an impressive fellow. What we do as a legacy is we continue to perpetuate his teachings and his ideas. And as part of that, we have a program called the Rabbi Sachs Scholars Program, which brings together academics and teachers and rabbis from around the world to think about Rabbi Sachs' teachings and how we can continue to perpetuate those and build on them. And my dear friend, Rabbi Barry Kleinberg, is one of our Sachs scholars, but he's in a slightly different capacity today to talk about this subject and with his research. So I'll hand over to Barry.
Shall I stand? Slightly more formal. Firstly, thank you so much for inviting me today. It's really wonderful to be here. My slide is now incorrect. New taxonomies of Jewish food. Kosher Chinese, kosher Indian. That's not what I'm going to talk about today. So I am a Sachs scholar, but I'm also coming towards, hopefully, the end of my PhD. It feels like the closer I get to the end, the further away it is. And I started my research 4 years ago, actually a lot before that, as I'll say in a few minutes. I started my research on Universalism. It was my big dream to finally define Universalism. And so far in 4 years and 50,000 words, the word universalism has not come up once. So I've failed in that task. But what I realized was that the way any one faith, and I'm coming really from the Orthodox Jewish perspective, will examine, understand the truth claims of other faiths. By the way, I'm going to use the word truth and truth claims, and I'm not going to define it. I'm preempting all of your questions. Right? I know that you're going to say to me, but what do you mean by true? I'll deal with it a bit, but I'm going to fudge it, because that's a whole different area. So I became very interested in the taxonomy of religious truth. But I thought I'd start with this. Nobody's in any danger. You're a professor for moral philosophy. Do you tie people to the rails to save your job? Hopefully you all recognize that. There's a great game, by the way. There's a card game of the trolley problem where you have multiple scenarios. My kids love it. I recommend it. Okay. How many people here are philosophers? None. Aha, okay. We're all philosophers. Okay. That's okay. So this joke was not that funny for most of you, I understand. Okay. So, when I put this slide together, 3 texts that changed my life, I realized there was a 4th text, and that was my marriage certificate, but I didn't think that was as interesting for you. So these 3 texts, over about 20 years, really changed the way I thought about myself as an Orthodox Jew. The first text I read was this one by Mark Shapiro, who's a professor at Scranton University and a dear friend. And he wrote this book. It got him into lots of trouble. But in Judaism we have, it's not so straightforward, but 13 principles of faith that Maimonides wrote back in the 12th century. And what Mark did in this book was say these 13 principles are not monolithic. People disagreed with these 13 principles, and he shows how there are problems with these 13 principles. So I read this book and I was like, it shook my Judaism. It made me think about my religion, probably in a more academic way than I'd ever done before. I really recommend it for everyone to read, because it makes you think about core principles of religion and how, I'm sure in all traditions, there are multiple voices, multiple ways of thinking about these things. The second text, which I know you can't see what it is, but the second text is a letter from the Jewish Chronicle, which is the Jewish newspaper in the UK. It's a bit of a rag. It was back in 1936, which was when this letter was written. This letter refers to an experience somebody had with an amazing rabbi called Abraham Isaac HaKohen Kook, Rav Kook, I will call him. Rav Kook lived between 1865 and 1935, and he was from Europe, but before the First World War broke out, Rav Kook went to Europe to raise money, and he got stuck in England. And this letter tells the story that Rabbi Kook, I should have put a picture, big beard, bigger than mine and Noah's, like big beard, and a fur hat. I don't know, what's Streimel? I mean, I don't know how you describe it. Ultra-Orthodox, like big fur hat. And the letter says that when he was in London, this rabbi used to go to the National Portrait Gallery, an art gallery, and that in itself is pretty crazy. You don't see that population going to art galleries. And Rabbi Kook said the following. He said, in the story of creation, God created light. And in the Jewish tradition, there's a commentary on this that says the light of creation was hidden away until a future point for the greatest of each generation. Right? This supernal light, this perfect light of creation. And Rabbi Kook said, in every generation, somebody merits to reveal this light from creation, whatever this means, right? But he said Rembrandt did that. Right? And I read this letter, I was like, Rabbi Kook, big beard, fur hat, went to an art gallery and saw the light of creation in a painting, we just talked about this, by a non-Jewish painter. This was like mind-blown moment. The third text was Rabbi Jonathan Sachs' Dignity of Difference. There's a lot to say about this text. There's a lot. It was written in 2002. It was written as a response to the terrible events of 9/11. And unfortunately, it was shrouded in controversy. Before the ink was dry, I like to say, the first edition was withdrawn and the second edition came out with some changes. I'm not going to talk about the changes today, but they didn't really change very much. He was very clever. But on page 55 of the first edition, which some of us are lucky enough to have a first edition, it's worth money, you can't have my copy. On page 55, Rabbi Sachs said something like, God spoke to Christians through Christianity, Muslims through Islam, and Jews through Judaism. And this one line, after my life had been changed here and here, this one line just rocked my world in a good way. How can a rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi, suggest what that sentence means? I don't know. I'd like to talk to him now about it. But on just a simple reading, it looks like he's saying God gave revelation in equal part to Jews through Judaism, Christians through Christianity, and Muslims through Islam. It's an amazing thing, right? And unheard of. although it's not so unheard of, but at the time it shook the Jewish world. So that was my journey, these 3 texts, and they were really important. I said I'm not going to talk about universalism, except to say that from a Jewish perspective, and I'm not so interested in the world to come or the afterlife soteriology, but from a Jewish perspective, everyone goes to heaven. Right? Heaven is not really a word we use, but whatever the world to come will be. We have a statement from the Babylonian Talmud that says righteous people of all nations have a share in the world to come. But that doesn't mean that all religions are true. It just means that everyone's got a share in the world to come. It doesn't tell us how we should view other religions. And it's a bit dependent on non-Jews keeping the Noahide laws, which is a fascinating topic. David Novak wrote the book on the Noahide laws. Some Jewish thinkers say that they are basically natural laws and everyone can come to them and you'll get a place in the world to come. Other thinkers say, no, you have to keep the Noahide laws because God said so. That's a bit more complicated. Why would a non-Jew say, I'm keeping the Noahide laws because God commanded me? Right? So it's a complicated area, but just as a given from my point of view, soteriology, the world to come, the afterlife, that's a given for everyone. But it doesn't tell us very much. What I'm really interested in is particularity. Right? Rabbi Sachs wrote about universalism, which he used most often to say there's a Jewish message for everyone, which might be the world to come. But he also wrote about particularity, my particular relationship as a Jew with God. And the question then is, well, okay, I have a particular relationship with God, that's good. I have a revelation on Mount Sinai 3,500 years ago, great. But what about Christians, Muslims, and all other religions? So what I like about Rabbi Sachs, most people read Rabbi Sachs and don't think he's very radical. But he was cool. He said, I have not hesitated to be radical. And I've deliberately chosen to express that radicalism in religious terms. We're going to come back to Rabbi Sachs and radicalism at the end. But I want to keep that in mind. Right? My perspective is an Orthodox Jewish perspective. I'm reading not only, but primarily through the prism of Rabbi Sachs's writings. And I want to see how far that can get me in terms of my understanding of the truth of other religions. By the way, if anyone wants to ask questions at any time, please do. Right, this is not formal, sort of formal, but not. I wear hearing aids, which means that I hear quite well. But if somebody over there just says something, I don't know where it's coming from, so throw your hand up, not because it's formal, just so I can see. And you guys all have strange accents, which makes it really hard for me. But please don't hesitate to ask questions. So this is a question I love to ask myself and my students. And you can slot any religions in, but from my perspective, it's great. Can Christianity be true from a Jewish perspective? Let's just ignore the word true for now. Right. Can Judaism be true from a Christian perspective? Sikhism, Hinduism, Islam, all the religions. Now, from my point of view, it might be the case. No, don't stop the recording. It might be the case that it can't be true for me as an Orthodox Jew that Jesus was the Messiah. Right? That just does not fit with Judaism. So what do I do with that one truth? Or what do I do with the whole of Christianity? Right? Do I throw the baby out with the bathwater? Do I go, oh, that bit's okay, but the rest is, Or is there another way? If you stick around, there might be another way, but I won't tell you the whole thing because I haven't written the last 10,000 words of my dissertation. Right? But we'll get close. Okay. Now, if you ask, I don't know about in the Christian community or the Muslim community, but if I sit in a room of Orthodox Jews and I ask this question, most of the time, 100% of people will say, no, it cannot be that Christianity is true. Many of them won't understand enough to really answer the question, but they'll have problems with Jesus being the Messiah or the Trinity. Those will be their, basic problems. But Rabbi Sachs said God spoke to Christians through Christianity. So there's something else going on here, right? So I had to start somewhere. And I started with Alan Race. Alan Race wrote a book in 1983 on Christianity and other religions. And he was the first person to come up with a taxonomy, a formal taxonomy of how Christians can view other religions. And his taxonomy was only 3/4 of this. It was Exclusivism, Inclusivism, and Pluralism. He didn't include Universalism. And it was a great start for me. That was where I started 5 years ago. And then Alan Brill came along and he wrote a fabulous book called Judaism and Other Religions. And he followed this taxonomy and he added a section on universalism. I'd be interested to do this, but I've got 4 hours, right? Right, okay. If I say to you, what does exclusivism mean? Right, that Christianity is an exclusivist religion, what does it mean, generally, in a broad sense? Someone, give me a tweet length, X length. I don't know what you call it anymore. All right, I'll do it.
Back to your slide about the world to come, like Christians might say.
Right, how do you say it? Extra ecclesiam, how do you say it? Solenalis. Yeah. But outside the church, there's no salvation.
Correct.
Okay, so I'm not, although that is part of it, that's definitely an exclusivist position. But in simple terms that I can deal with, I would say my religion is true, your religion is false. Right? That's the brutal exclusivist position. And ironically, I feel that in the everyday world of religious people, most people fit into this if they haven't thought much about religion. Right? Most Jews will think all other religions are false. And I don't know, I don't want to speak for most Christians or most Muslims, but I think they'll say, my religion is true, therefore other religions are false. So that was how, by the way, Race and Brill basically expressed exclusivism. I'm going to tell you why that's a terrible definition, and I've rewritten that category. Inclusivism, some writers have suggested that exclusivism and pluralism have had the most written about them, and inclusivism is the hardest to understand. But in simple terms, Race and Brill said inclusivism is what I call the home faith, my faith, has all of the truth, and your faith, which I call the alien faith, has some of the truth. Right? That's inclusivism, which is also problematic, and hopefully I'll get there as well. I want to fudge the next two, right? Pluralism. Like there's so many different variations of pluralism. At the end of my research, I want to end, and I'm really working on it now. I'm very lucky. I'm coming to the end of a 1-month paid sabbatical. I have a real job. I'm not. Philosophy is just a part-time gig, and I'm working on this now. My version of pluralism is that not only are there multiple truths, but you can have contradictory truth claims that are both true at the same time, right? The law of non-contradiction does not exist, as far as I'm concerned, which is a bold thing to say. Please don't ever play this video back to me. But P and not P can both be true at the same time. So Jesus is the Messiah in Christianity, but not in Judaism. That doesn't mean that there's a contradiction. It means there are two truths. That's how I'm understanding pluralism. We're not going to really deal with pluralism. It's too complex. And universalism, your guess is as good as mine. I'm going to say there's one truth, and that's about it. Okay, so that's the existing taxonomy. And the more I delved into this categorization, the more I realized it totally lacks nuance. Right? It's got to be more complex than this. So I came up with a new term called exhaustivism. It doesn't mean I'm exhausted. You all look exhausted, right? And exhaustivism, which gets rid of exclusivism, or it sort of subsumes exclusivism, is a category that says my faith, the home faith, exhausts all the truth, right, and is soteriologically sufficient, means that my religion is going to get me to heaven, but your religion, we'll see there are various ways we can fit your religion, the alien faith, into this. So radical exhaustivism is really like the old exclusivism, where two faiths have no common truth claims, and the home faith is exhaustive both in alethic truth and soteriological, the world to come terms, right? I think most people, as I said, think that that's where they are, but you and I all know this does not exist in the world, right? Because all religions have at least some shared truth claims, right? And it may not be all the same ones, but like, do not murder is shared by multiple religions. So we have some overlap, the Venn diagram. I have Venn diagrams, but they're hopeless. I need like a 3D thing there. I can't do that. So to say that any two religions can have no common truth claims, I think, is just nonsense. It's impossible. So we'll get rid of that. But then I wanted to distinguish between those truth claims shared by religions which are what I call non-foundational. I don't want to say trivial, but non-foundational. I'll explain what I mean by foundational in a minute. But many religions, I don't know about all of them, will say it's good to give charity, right? But giving charity, if you took that out of the religion, would still leave you with the religion, right? Christianity would still exist as a coherent, cohesive religion without the thought that it's good to give charity. Judaism says it, Islam says it, all the religions say. So moderate exhaustivism says that the home faith contains all the truth and is sufficient soteriologically, right, the world to come, though alien faiths may share some trivial truths with the home faith. These are neither foundational, which we'll talk about. Okay. Good, you have some truths, but it doesn't get you very far. So then I came up with non-exhaustive exclusivism. It's just nice to make up words, right? It just feels like a real privilege that I made up new words. Okay. And this is where I think it gets really super interesting and super complicated, because although there can be debate about all different aspects of the monotheistic faiths, which is really where I'm doing my work, we all sort of agree that there's one God, right? I say that, in a broad, loose way. We're all monotheistic, that by definition we have shared foundational truths. Which means without those truths, the religion ceases to look like the religion you're talking about. But what's really interesting, right, about all of this exhaustivism is that it's, as I say, it's replacing exclusivism because that doesn't make sense. It says, yes, we have shared truth claims, but it doesn't get the alien faiths anywhere. Which is really, I don't feel comfortable with that, right? I just don't feel comfortable with that. By the way, I shouldn't take anything for granted or say it goes without saying. But the basis of all of this in many ways is the idea that God created man, humankind, in his image, her image, right? So if that's the starting point, then, right, all going to heaven is one thing. That's great from a Jewish perspective. But what about the truth? We can't just discount all these religions because they're not Judaism. So I got rid of exclusivism, or I got exhausted by exclusivism, and then I added this new category. Now, Rabbi Sachs said so many, I could just have like 100 slides of his great quotes, but this one we've had already. God has spoken to mankind in many languages, through Judaism to Jews, Christianity to Christians, Islam to Muslims, right? But look at this. Truth on the ground is multiple, partial. A lot of my work has been looking at, I'm particularly interested, I wish I could do more, we'll do another lecture tomorrow now, on John Hick and John Hick's pluralism. And Hick used Immanuel Kant and the ideas of the noumena and the phenomena, right? God is the real capital R that we can never know. And each religion for Hick, like the Jain parable of the elephant and the blind men all touching the elephant, each religion is getting some of the truth. So Rabbi Sachs says truth on the ground is multiple partial. We can never know God perfectly. We only have a fragment. Fragments of it lie everywhere. Each person, culture, and language has part of it. None has it all. Truth on earth is not, and nor can it aspire to be, the whole truth. It is limited, not comprehensive, particular, not universal. When two propositions conflict, it is not necessarily because one is true and the other false. Right? He's done all my work for me. The reason I put this here is because I wanted to come to an idea about inclusivism that was different to what everyone else said about inclusivism. In the traditional Alan Race, Alan Brill books, inclusivism is I have all the truth, you have some of the truth. And that could work here. But here, Rabbi Sachs is saying there are fragments of truth everywhere. That seems to me, maybe I'm just looking for it, that there are different fragments of it everywhere. So what I do about the non-shared truth claims, I'm not talking about the contradictory truth claims. Here he's talking about the fact that there's no real conflict. That's great. But what about where an alien faith makes a truth claim which is not contradictory to Judaism? What do I do with that? And that's really interesting. So I came to inclusivism. And I said of all of the categories, it's the most difficult. So I tried to come up with how the writers are really talking about inclusivism. And I came up with these categories. Closed inclusivism. If there are any truths in alien faiths, then they must also be found in the home faith. The home faith teaches more truths or the shared truths more fully. What's the problem with that? I know you're all keeping up and you're just shy, but what's the problem with that? That's just exhaustivism. That's not inclusivism, right? So I was like, that's not inclusivism. It's got the thing with the taxonomy is if you have 4 categories, the 4 categories have to be distinct, right? And there's nothing in here which is not included in my new definition. Okay. Non-soteriological inclusivism, Race defined inclusivism in terms of soteriology. An inclusivist religion, on his reading, allows other religions to have spiritual power and depth, but denies that other religions can bring salvation, right? So for Race, inclusivism means you guys are cool, right? But that's about it, right? Again, he's not saying anything new or useful about how we deal with truth claims. So Brill, from the Jewish perspective, says inclusivism is about truth, and he says it's the understanding of other faiths using the categories of one's own faith to view other religions, to accept and reject parts of the other religion. Very nice. Condescending, right? Is Christianity true? Well, I can only look at Christianity through my own prism. And if it fits with Judaism, then I'm happy, and if not, not, right? All of them fit into exhaustivism, either a moderate exhaustivism or a non-exclusive exhaustivist position. They all say there is some truth, but it's all judged by my truth. And that's weak. That's really weak. So, yeah, okay, open inclusivism. I didn't write this. A guy called Griffiths wrote about open inclusivism. I can't take credit. What I've done in my research is take all of the definitions of inclusivism and say that 3/4 out of the 4 that I'm looking at are not inclusivism, but we're left with something called open inclusivism. And I think this is really beautiful. There might be truths found in alien faiths which are not also found in the home faith, and I love this, which can subsequently illuminate the home faith. Right? I've gone much further than this, and I'm suggesting that it's not that it might subsequently illuminate, but I, as an adherent of the home faith, would have a responsibility to go and find truths in other faiths if they are going to illuminate the home faith, right? And Rabbi Kook's Rembrandt, right, him looking at a non-Jewish painting, right, I know it's not a religious truth, but looking outside of his own faith world and saying, I'm seeing the hidden light from creation, that's a very powerful thing. Jeremy, you're frowning. Ask me a question. Don't be shy. Okay. We've got another few days together. He can ask me all the questions he likes. Yes?
Is this what we seek in interfaith dialogue?
Say that again.
Is this what we seek in interfaith dialogue?
Okay. I'm not talking about interfaith dialogue. I can talk about interfaith dialogue a little bit. I think dialogue is complicated from a Jewish perspective, by the way. In 1962, the most important American rabbi for the whole of the 20th century was somebody called Rabbi Soloveitchik, and he wrote a book about dialogue. And he was very post-Holocaust, post-2,000 years of tension between the church and Judaism. He was very against dialogue. He said we can work together on communal things, but we can't dialogue. Dialogue sometimes seems to be, people just saying, oh, we've got this in common and that's cool. I don't think that's dialogue. For me, I think answering your question is, I'd love to sit down and learn with somebody, maybe the Bible, but learn, different perushim, what's the word? Different commentaries from a Christian perspective, right? And we don't see that level of dialogue. There's been suspicion, I think, and it's fair to say, a nervousness about that. But it does happen. It does happen, but not a lot, not enough. But it's not just like learning. For me, it wouldn't be. I've struggled to find a good example. Because actually I think all of the religions, all of them, not just the monotheistic ones, share so much. But the Eastern traditions and their approach to meditation, although there are ideas like in Judaism, but could I improve my approach to prayer by taking in some of the ideas from the Eastern traditions, right? That's the way I'm thinking about it. Okay, I said we'd come back to Rav Kook. Rav Kook said we must study all the sciences of the world, all the teachings of life, all the different cultures, the religious and ethical doctrines of every nation, and with great broad-mindedness must understand how to purify them. Now, that's really interesting. Purify them sounds a little bit condescending, but I don't think he meant it that way, and his corpus is amazing. But he means that that Judaism will be illuminated, everything will be lifted up by learning these outside things, right? The religious and ethical doctrines. Rabbi Kook is one of the great thinkers, and because at the same time he seems to be horribly against every other religion and the most pluralist thinker you've ever read, right? So it's really hard to pin him down. So, we cherry pick the ones we like, and that's what we do. So Rav Shagar, who's also an important 20th century rabbi who lived in Israel, he says there's an amazing example in the book of Genesis that Laban the Aramean, used Aramaic in the text of the Hebrew Bible. We have this phrase, Yagar Sahaduta, right, which means pillar witness. Jacob raised the translation to the holy language and called it Galed. He changed it to Hebrew. He took outside words, made our language better, right? Purified, made more holy. We don't see this very much in the Orthodox Jewish world, but I think when we're talking about truth claims which are not contradictory but can add to our religions, whatever those religions are, this is really what inclusivism should be about. Have I been clear about that? Okay. One person said yes, so I'm taking that as everyone said that.
Can I give you an example of that from my own life?
Yes, please.
So I had a student, I was studying Torah with a student of mine the other day, and was expressing that he had trouble identifying moments of experience of God's presence. And so I don't know anything about the Ignatian tradition, But I do know that one element of the Ignatian tradition is that there is this sort of taking a time in the day to sort of go through your day and identify moments in which God's presence was especially felt. And I suggested this very particular mode of Jesuit practice to my Jewish student, that maybe after davening mincha, that's the way I said it, right after the afternoon prayer time, maybe take some moments in which you could do this thing of Ignatian spirituality and apply it to your own life. And I think he thought that was very...
Did you do it?
Did he do it? I don't know, me. But
yeah, that's beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful. Okay.
Is it illuminating, like the other tradition is illuminating your tradition as opposed
Yeah. Okay, so we have a great quote. This is my favorite quote for the day. It didn't change on the screen. We may have lost connection. Yeah, okay. So I'm just going to read you the quote. This is Rabbi Sachs, and it makes me a little bit emotional every time I read it. I don't say that lightly, but, and I've read this many times, it gives me strength. Can I, a Jew, hear the echoes of God's voice in that of a Hindu or Sikh or Christian or Muslim, or in the words of an Eskimo from Greenland speaking about a melting glacier? Can I do so and feel not diminished but enlarged? What then becomes of my faith, which until then encompassed the world and must now make space for another faith, another way of interpreting the world, right? And there's one word in that quote, and it's the most stunning quote from a chief rabbi, but an Orthodox Jewish rabbi. Can I be enlarged by, right, and not diminished? Can I look at people of another faith and tradition, and can I be enlarged by that? And he says, the way he says, until that moment, right, the way the world was seen by now, I have to make space for another faith, another way of interpreting the world. It's absolutely stunning. So I have argued, although I think it goes much further, the Rabbi Sachs could definitely be read as an open inclusivist. Right? I see that throughout his writings. But I didn't put this in my slides. I've got a little box that says, for my position on pluralism, ... right? So I was going to leave you in suspense. But I think it's only fair that I explain a little bit of where I'm coming from a pluralist position. So John Hick, he used the Jane parable, right? There's an elephant in the room, a literal elephant in the room rather than a... So there's an elephant in the room and 6 blind men all touching different parts, and, they all describe the elephant in different ways. And Hick said that's how we experience God. God is the real, capital R, which we can never know. For which there's good, I know for sure, Jewish and Christian support for. And each religion is one phenomenal approach to the real. And many people have attacked Hick. Notably, Mavrodes and Plantinga both wrote, I have 4 major attacks on Hick. But they essentially say, the big question you end up with is, well, what do you actually believe in, right? Mavrodes talks about the disguise model. You end up God being disguised in multiple ways, and therefore we all believe nothing. Or we have a position where there's a hierarchy of truths, right? One person feels and goes, oh, this is an elephant, and the other one touches something else and goes, oh, it's a cupboard, right? So there's a hierarchy of truths. And these attacks on Hick, very well established attacks on Hick. So how do I defend Hick? So Crispin Wright, a brilliant philosopher of truth, wrote, I wish I wasn't saying this on camera, a really complicated paper that is impossible to read. So my supervisor and I spent 3 months reading the paper together. I'm not talking about like 500 pages. I'm talking about 30-page paper. And at the end of it, we sort of both went, I don't really know what he's talking about. Okay. But what his conclusion is, which is fascinating, is that each religion has its own discourse. And those discourses are propped up by what he calls the platitudes, right? There are certain, in order for a statement to be true, it has to be transparent and it has 6 or 7 platitudes, right? I know we're not talking about truth, but so in order for me to make any sentence and say anything true, it has to go through a whole series of tests for him. He's a pragmatist, which is interesting, and what he essentially says about truth, not about religion, is that you can have a statement, P, backed up by all of these platitudes, which makes it true. You can also have a statement, not P, backed up by all these platitudes, and it's also true. Mm-hmm. So you end up in a situation where you have 2 contradictory truth claims. So I started off, now this is a hugely complex area, but I want to introduce the idea. I started off with the question, can Jesus be the Messiah from a Jewish perspective? It's the wrong question. It's an irrelevant question. Because for Christianity, within the discourse, it absolutely is true. And therefore, all the platitudes are satisfied and Jesus is the Messiah. From a Jewish perspective, the sentence, Jesus was not the Messiah, is also true. Which is really weird, right? It's really weird. Coming back to your question, this is not a good place to end, but it leaves me feeling quite uncomfortable. Because I may end up trapping myself. Because what I wanted to do, by the way, this all started, my youngest is now 20. So when she was at elementary school, primary school, yes, good, I translate everything for myself. There was a father of other kids who was a real troublemaker. And he used to wear a t-shirt to this Orthodox Jewish elementary school that said, God is too big for any one religion, right? What we call chutzpah, right? Proper chutzpah, right? So I used to get really angry with him. Now, later on, I agree with the t-shirt. I think it's a great t-shirt. You just don't wear it in certain context, right? So I'm looking for, how do I understand Christianity from a Jewish perspective? Can it be true? And I'm going through this whole taxonomy, and Crispin writes awful paper, and the answer is yes, but what does it mean at the end of the day is there is no room for dialogue because they're 2 separate discourses. Right? 2 separate discourses. Because my truth is a discourse that fulfills the platitudes, and the Islamic truth is here, and they're all parallel to each other. I'm not saying this is my conclusion, but I fear that if I go to the point where I'm going to prove that all religions are true without it reducing itself to relativism and, postmodern thinking about truth. I'll do a great job, and ironically, I'll be shooting myself in the foot. And coming back to Rabbi Soloveitchik, and I don't think he thought all of this through when he wrote his essay, Confrontation, in the early 1960s, but his objection to dialogue was, we don't speak the same language. I just wasted 5 years of my life coming to the same conclusion, but I really don't want to come to that conclusion. What I want to get to, and I'm not going to get to, I don't mean just today, I mean in my dissertation. I'm joking with my supervisor, it's already postdoc work. Yeah, he's laughing as well. Is Universalism. And there's a very fine academic, also a Sachs scholar, but that's by the by, called Malka Simkovich. Where does she work?
She was in Chicago.
She works at Jewish Publication Society now, right? And she's written a lot on ancient Jewish history, and she wrote a book on Universalism. And I read it like 5 years ago. And in her preface, she has one line, which I thought, this is where my research is going, and since then it's just gone a completely opposite way. But she says something like, all people have equal access to the divine. Now, I know that there are a lot of words in there that we'd have to unpack. But there's something in that sentence that, and I mean from an Orthodox Jewish perspective, she's talking about a version of universalism in the ancient world that's been lost. There's something in that sentence which, it doesn't matter whether it's about truth or soteriology, it must be the case that we were all created in God's image and we all have equal access to the divine. I don't know what that looks like yet, but it will help me maybe deal with the problem I have with pluralism, and I'll come back in 5 years when I've done some more research. Thank you very much. I'm really happy to take questions if people want to. Yes.
So one of the things that I've learned, certainly in my time here, and especially with my esteemed senior colleagues, Dr. Hennenberg and Dr. Sarah Tobrick, is that there's a little bit of imbalance when it comes to Jewish, Christian, and Jewish Muslim dialogue, because it seems like Jews can see both Christians and Muslims as others, fully others, in ways that neither Christians nor Muslims can see Jews and Judaism, right? To say that a Jew can say, I speak one language and Christianity speaks another language, but so much of the discourse of Christianity is the assertion that, no, from a Jewish language comes Christianity, right? That you almost can't articulate a Christianity without articulating a Judaism too. And to some degree, that's true of Islam as well, right? That how can one articulate what Islam is without talking about prophets' ideas, which are in some ways Jewish? And so how does one sort of get out of that? It seems like much of these new taxonomies has to assume, much like Soloveitchik wants to assume or assert, that no, these are different communities which are sort of radically other, when neither Christians nor Muslims are willing to see themselves as radically other, because so much of their own identity comes from being derived from the truth claims of a Judaism. And so how do you move beyond that sort of fundamental problem?
It's easy for me. I'm on the Jewish side of the equation.
Right. And maybe this is the difference, is because I don't know if I'm Orthodox or not. We can talk to my shrink about that. But where I sit, it's much harder to sort of maintain that exclusively Jewish perspective, given that here in the TUI Center, we're so ensconced in seeing things from those other perspectives.
So, I mean, maybe I'm going underneath the question a little bit. The other for me is just a concept I'm not interested in terms of, I don't see other. Through my research, I'm looking at, it's quite abstract. I'd like to make it real, but it's like, my religion says A, your religion says B. They can't both be. And therefore, as a Jew, I'll look at Christianity as maybe other, but I'm saying, hold on a minute, that can't be the case. God revealed himself to all of these religions, equally, it seems, according to Rabbi Sachs. There's no real sense of other, right? It's just, it's quite abstract, but I don't see that, right? I know we use the word other, but I don't like it because I think it's the wrong word. Yes?
When you were talking about P and not P and these platitudes, so there's sort of like a language game of Jewish philosophy, and there's a language game of Christian theology, and there's a language game, right? Yeah. But is it possible that we could have platitudes around interreligious dialogue? And we say, I am a believer and I'm going to interrogate my beliefs and learn about yours as a way to illuminate my own. Is there a way, are there platitudes around I don't know.
I'm just going to say it like this. I love it. Okay. I haven't worked that through, but I don't see why, a middle path can't have its own platitudes.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering, yeah.
I really like it.
I think that they can see me like, this is a thing we do, this is a thing we do, this is a thing we do. Those that's a great kind of like not wishy-washy pluralism.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Exactly. Not wishy-washy pluralism. I mean, by the way, I want to include in this arena atheism, right, as part of the all paths to God. Rabbi Cook spoke about it a lot. That
Right.
the atheist is looking for God, like he's really interested in that. But yes, 10 out of 10.
Interesting.
And Noah, you were also 10 out of 10. Yeah, just
So maybe
yeah.
I'd like to comment a little bit and maybe also a question. Now, from an Islamic perspective, when I look at your thought, Islam speaks of many messengers of God. Like Moses is a messenger of God, Jesus is a messenger of God. Actually, it says 124,000 prophets have come. And all of them were giving the same message. The only difference was because of the time. New people are coming and they need new explanation of the same message. So these new messengers will bring new things into the message, but the essence is the same.
Yeah.
And therefore, it is like a one religion. It's like a one reality. The whole universe.
Yeah.
The only time, because of the time, it changes.
Yeah.
Can we call it universalism?
Yeah, I think that's. We need to talk a bit more about this. I think that is my universalism. Just on the issue of prophets, it's really interesting from a Jewish perspective. There were non-Jewish prophets, and then prophecy ended. I was only reading yesterday about Christian theology and when prophecy ended in Christianity. It was really interesting and has parallels with Judaism. But the classic texts acknowledge, and Rabbi Sachs is not so radical, even though he said he's radical, that God still speaks to people, Jews and non-Jews, right? So God speaking to everyone is, more to be done here.
And also there's another verse in the Quran. It speaks directly to the concept of salvation. It says those who are Muslims, Jews, Christians, and Sabi'ins. Sabi'in is another group in Mesopotamia, but it's not very well known. Maybe that Sabi'in, this ambiguity is intentional, so that any other tradition, if they believe in God, and they believe in the afterlife, and they do good deeds, they will receive reward in the afterlife.
They don't have to believe that Muhammad was the true prophet. So they have to believe that as well, or not?
Like they have to. It is not mentioned.
God.
In this verse, it's not mentioned.
Right.
They have to believe in God. It says they have to believe in God.
Yeah.
They have to believe in the afterlife.
Yeah.
And they have to do good deeds.
It's like Yosef Albo, a classic Jewish thinker, says there are three principles. You have to believe in creation, revelation, and reward and punishment. It's very similar. Yeah. There's more food. Please don't be shy about the food. And thank you all so much. Thank you.
Yeah.